Good afternoon, everybody. This will cover accessing comparable benefits and community services. Why don't we go ahead and get started here? If I can make it advance. Okay, try this. All right, Amber, I'm having, there we go. So youth in particular have faced some very challenging times. Right now, you know, the economy is in a poor state, and of course that's affected not just the people who have jobs or lost jobs, but also those individuals who are out there probably for the first time looking for jobs. Youth have been dealing with, in addition to that economic downturn, being in competition really with individuals who they maybe weren't in competition with before. So you have any number of displaced workers, you have people who had retired who are trying to come back into the workforce, and they're not always going back into jobs that they held previously. Sometimes they're going into positions just to make ends meet, which might be things that are traditionally held, or at least we think of it in a traditional way, as being held by youth or young people. So the unemployment rate for youth right now is about 2 times that of any other age group. So when you think of individuals or people 16 to 24 years old, they're at 2 times the unemployment rate for any other group in the state of Florida. So what does this really mean for us? It means that we need to have access to resources earlier, and that those resources need to be in place to provide the support in youth when they're transitioning, making that change from high school into training, into higher education, or directly into careers or work. They need to have access to things like mental and physical health resources, independent living, career and employment, and then of course all of those community agencies and organizations. And they need to have an awareness of what those agencies are going to be able to provide, because with that economic downturn, a lot of the agencies are not even providing the level of assistance they were in the past. So, yeah, I guess that's enough doom and gloom. What are we going to do about that? We really want to take stock, see what there is available in your community. Some of the good resources are a good way to start out if you have no idea of what might be available, is through a referral service. And you have referral services like 211. There's a link here. I know that the presentation, is being recorded. It'll be made available. So you do have these resources. There's local interagency councils and committees. So you have a group of professionals and our community members, parents, oftentimes youth, who are involved in trying to provide these supports. So a lot of times they'll collaborate and network to identify where the needs are and then look for resources to address those needs. Your parent-teacher associations. And I know that that sounds a lot, but really the parents who are participating in these organizations, whether they're interagency or parent-teacher associations, these are your active individuals out in the community. They're oftentimes connected to many groups. So when you get a resource or you ask for a resource from one of these organizations, you're not just talking to that organization, you're talking to all the other groups or all the other activities that they're connected with. So those parent teachers, those active people, the ones who maybe have some additional time, or if they don't, they're making that time, that's really one of those key places, because they typically have a good awareness of what's happening within the local community. Disability organizations and support groups. If you have a person with a particular disability, that support group, believe me, they probably beat down every door. They have a good idea of what is and what isn't available. They may know that there's additional funds that have just come in because they have a coordinator or a counselor that's assisting them. All of that information, what I do is I always try and make sure that I provide sites that you can access and get some more information, or at least have somebody to contact to help provide some additional direction. Y'all are probably somewhat familiar already with FAST. That's the Florida Alliance for Assistive Services and Technology. They have a resource and self-help guide for children with disabilities and their families. It's a relatively new publication, but it's very comprehensive as far as being able to get into what resources may be available, especially in the way of anything assistive. But they also provide some direction as far as education and other resources as well. So Florida HATS. Those are the Health and Transition Services. They have developed a 411 on health insurance for youth. They have a healthcare transition training program for both families and youth. They do have a regional service directory for health services. So if you're not quite sure if that service is available, they can always go to the directory and get the 411 on it. And then, of course, the educational piece of it, learning about your health. One of the key things that we learn early on is that if you have those health services as a youth, you're far more likely to have those health services after, because you've seen what the benefit is. So when you go out there looking for things like employment, or you start getting involved in training or education for a career, one of the things that you're looking at is those health benefits. And especially for us in vocational rehabilitation, our emphasis is on employment, but one of those key things we educate both youth and families on is making sure that you have access, and that's a benefit in and of itself when you can get that health insurance. And I have to say it's become less and less common, so to the extent you almost have to make that part of your search or part of your development as you're transitioning from high school. Mental health and well-being. We do have Department of Children and Families Mental Health Services. And this really, when you talk about mental health and you talk about youth, it's one of those underserved groups among young people. Because a lot of times if you're having a mental health issue or condition, it doesn't necessarily show up with your academics. You may seemingly be doing okay in your class, but you may be suffering in other ways. It's not until you have that sudden drop that maybe there's any type of indication. And then it's questioned, well, why are you doing this? It seems there may be a maturity issue that's thought to be the cause of it, but it really may be something else going on. So there will be a lot of individuals out there who might have a mental health issue, depression, anxiety, something that they're dealing with relating to those things. Those are some of the two big ones anyway. But they're not being identified as having that kind of condition or needing these kinds of supports. So it's almost a situation where you have to know that child and know and say, well, this isn't typical, and then having the wherewithal to ask, well, do you have things going on? And if not being able to ask, be able to at least provide them information so that maybe they can seek out and get some help on their own. The multi-agency network for students with emotional behavioral disabilities, you have SEDNet. They will actually go into the school systems and work with the educators in developing that infrastructure and those resources to be able to provide assistance to you. Because like I said, most of these youth, they won't have individual educational plans. They won't be requiring those typical accommodations that you normally associate with youth that have disabilities, but they definitely do need supports, and they need to get those in place. Typically, the longer an issue goes on, the more debilitating it becomes, and the longer it takes for that person to recover from that. So if there's any way at all to connect them early on to that resource, we really want to look and make sure that that's happening for them. Private provider resources. Oftentimes, when you do have access to insurance, there are going to be those private resources, but people don't think to look into those. Again, it's very difficult to get people really educated on those mental health issues, those mental health concerns. And again, early identification and early supports can really mitigate that so that it's more of an adjustment issue for the youth as opposed to becoming a full-blown debilitating disability. I just bumped my phone on. I take it everybody's still there. My light's on, so it's good.
Yeah.
Recreation and leisure. One of the things that we don't do a very good job of, and I say we, Americans, is figuring out ways to relax. It's almost like we put ourselves in this go-go mentality where we have to get everything done, fast. What more can we cram into the day? How more accessible can we be to our employers? So really, if you're going to have a full life, you have to incorporate that recreation, that leisure into it. And it's not something that necessarily comes naturally. If you don't come from that within your own family, within your own lifestyle, then that's something that almost has to be taught, has to, have that education. We have more and more children now who are sitting in front of computers, accessing their technology 24/7, and they're not getting the benefit of what happens when you get involved with sports associations or you get involved with physical activities. The Florida Disabled Outdoor Association, sunshine, vitamin D. I mean, it's the one vitamin you can get just from standing outside. And I know nobody wants to stand outside in Florida at the moment. It's a little warm out there today. But it's one of those things that we really have to look at in order to make the work, make the employment piece of it, make that independent living piece of it more enjoyable, is to help them really, become well-rounded and to relieve those stresses. I know that none of you all have stress in your jobs. Yeah, I know it's a bad joke. But finding ways to relieve those stresses then can make for a happier job in itself. The Boys and Girls Club is another good example. You're also learning some of those social activities, some of those interactions. Those are important pieces. Social interest clubs. They have them all over the place, schools, libraries, bookstores, if you still have a bookstore. A lot of those are shutting down now because of technology. And then hobby shops. A staggering statistic for me is that when they really looked intently at suicide among youth, among young people, they found that those youth could have prevented that suicide, or could have, sidestepped that if they would have had one good thing in their life. And that one good thing that they needed to have would have been one good friend. And that if people have one good friend, they tend not to take that path. So to the extent that we can encourage that socialization and develop those skills, we really need to look at ways we can do that. Athletic activities and interests. You don't have to be an athlete to be involved in athletics or to be a supporter. Yeah, athletic supporter. Faith-based youth organizations. There are all kinds of organizations out there, pretty much something for everybody. Even if you don't have a particular faith, there's a group of individuals that have that similar mindset as well. So whatever it is, there's a way to interact with other individuals and a way to start getting connected to the community. Now, all of this, of course, is helping to build support, build that network, because the more people you know, the more likely you are to be able to become employed as you're transitioning out of high school and into that next step with education or the world of work. Half of all the jobs that we get come from word of mouth or networking. So then this involvement or this engagement in social activities becomes paramount. So even though we're looking at all these ways to get these services and all the services that are available, the real key piece of that is development of those social skills, which in turn turns around and helps you to create that network that's going to support you as you make that transition out into adulthood. Self-determination, when you get involved with that. Now, a lot of students who are coming out of high school, they're finding that they lack some of those independent living skills that they need in order to be successful in life, in order to take that next step into adulthood. And that's one of those things that if for some reason it's not being captured in the school system, and the school does an awful lot, but if that's not happening, there are independent living centers that can help support that process, and they'll focus more intently on development of those independent living skills. And they have them all over the state of Florida. There will be a map and list of all of those centers that you can get in touch with. And I typically encourage, if you see that your child or a youth that you know is going to need those skills, or maybe they're a little lacking in those skills in some aspect, then I encourage getting involved earlier rather than waiting for graduation. So if you can actually start working on those independent living skills, you're going to be better prepared as you make that transition to the next step. Now, if you are short on those living skills, or if you maybe need to develop them some more, and you're waiting until you're trying to get involved in a training program or involved in education, and then you're having to work on that on top of it, that's a huge change. And then those kind of things lead to some of that anxiety that we talked about and the need for some of those mental health services. And we all know youth with disabilities, but a lot of youth, especially those with developmental disabilities, may be a little shyer than their peers, maybe need a little more encouragement. So they do need to develop that social skill, but this gives them some additional ways to interact with other individuals, other people out there, and to really develop some of that confidence they may need as they move forward in life. Florida Commission for the Transportation Disadvantaged, transportation is a huge issue. One of the key factors in becoming employed is being able to navigate your community. And again, you know that you go to point A and point B, but if you don't know how to get around your community, that's going to be a huge disadvantage for you when you're trying to take that next step out of high school. There are some resources that way, but really, one of the big things, we talked a little bit about FAST. The technology that you can use these days really, makes it a more even playing field for students, especially students with severe disabilities. You have now PDAs, smartphones, all kinds of devices that give you all kinds of access that you didn't have previously, and in a way that's socially acceptable. And no longer are you carrying around this huge box or piece of technology that's all bulky and clunky. If you need it, there's an app for that, right? I don't mean to sound like a commercial, but just even getting around the system, there's an application that'll tell you step by step where to get on, when to get off, give you reminders. You'll path out everything, tell you about some places along the way that you may want to stop at. That may not be as good, but all of those things to say that there's support there that wasn't there previously. And it's just a matter of accessing it and getting people used to dealing or working with those technology pieces. Because if you don't become familiar with it before you need it, chances are you're not going to use it. I've, in the past, provided technology for people as they needed it, and because it's a learning process, they do what most of us do when we're dealing with a lot of issues. The thing that we didn't have in hand before, we're not going to use. And so we put it away somewhere, like in a junk drawer. And we know how those junk drawers accumulate things, right? We definitely don't want that for this kind of situation. Self-determination and advocacy, the schools have a Stand Up For Me curriculum that really helps that. If the student has an individual educational plan, that IEP team will work with the student to see, if they have self-determination needs so that they can guide their IEP process, because it really should be driven by the youth. And that's one of those critical things that doesn't always happen in when schools or when individuals are trying to be expedient. Sometimes they say, well, I know what's best for this individual, but really what's best is to give them the power to make those decisions. And when I say give them, just pass that power along, because it's really not giving. they should have that already. Student and family guides for the IEP and accommodations. Those resources are available through Project 10. 10, even though it's the number 10 on here, stands for the Transition Education Network. All of the resources through the Department of Education are being revised and updated through Project 10. So if there's a Department of Education publication, the most recent and current version will always be available at Project 10, probably at the same time or earlier than it would be in other places. And hopefully that'll be more, or definitely accessible, but more accessible. I know, quick show of hands, have y'all ever tried to look up anything on the Department of Education website? They've gotten better, but you really want to be able to get your hands on it easily and quickly. Youth development and leadership. That's one of those things that I think we can all agree on and get behind, is that when you're trying to sit there and make sure that the person is independent, the way to do that is to really develop them into leaders. And those are going to be our future leaders, to be able to mentor each other, to share practices. In fact, if you ask, any parent or any educator, if they're not listening to the parent, are they listening to the teacher? Maybe yes, maybe no. If they're not listening to the teacher and they're not listening to the parent, then who are they listening to? And oftentimes they're going to listen to their friends or to their peers before they listen to adults in their life. I mean, it's a sad fact. We've seen it happen, and of course we always have the same kind of thought that comes with it. If everybody jumped off a cliff, would you, yeah, my father comes back into me from time to time. I do channel him. And the answer should be no, but of course, them talking to you, they're going to say, yeah, sure, I'll jump off that cliff, just to get you going. But that's just another example of really developing and helping them to make that transition from high school into life as an independent employed young adult. Which brings us to employed, which is career employment guidance. Career and service centers, they all have what they call a disability program navigator. Now, we talked about the economy a little while ago, and I know that's a shock that the economy is in trouble these days. But some of the funding for the disability program navigators was cut as a result of that. So they may not have a dedicated position, but every center will have somebody who's responsible for that disability program navigation. So these are all sources and resources that are available to individuals with disabilities at the career and service centers. So being able to get in there and take advantage of the training and the resources that are there, being able to do a job search, being able to find out, what companies, say a person out there had a minor in German and they wanted to find out how many German companies there were in the state of Florida. You'd be surprised. There are thousands of companies over there that are German that are operating here in the state of Florida. But you wouldn't get that kind of information unless you know how to get in there and use the resources of those career and service centers. Again, just a quick show of hands. How many people, have done an online resume or an online application? Okay. I see. When you have that, and especially for youth, when they're doing those online resumes, their online applications, there's this idea that as they're putting in that online application, or that there's somebody on the other end of that computer who's taking a look at their information. And nothing could be further from the truth. What happens is that they have a computer program in the background running. And that computer program is looking for things like keywords. And those keywords are typically wrapped around the job description, and specifically those knowledge, skills, and abilities that are identified as being necessary for that job. So when that computer, which is not a person, is looking at a resume or application, they're just pulling out words, and then they're sorting them based on those words. Who has most of those words? So when you're doing that, one of the good things about the Career and Service Center, you can go on to their ONET program and take a look at any job, and right there in that job description, it tells you all of the knowledge, skills, and abilities required for that job. And then the person who's looking at that can look at incorporating, when appropriate, the things that they do in those terms. So they're using the actual knowledge, skills, and abilities so that they're getting screened in by that computer program instead of being screened out. Because if you get screened out before you ever get to a person, you have no chance. And you have to have at least some chance. So that's just an example of the access that you get there. You also want to use your power words, but that's another presentation all about putting together functional resumes and developing yourself so that you're able to secure that job. Some other guidance that you can get is through the school-assisted career assessments. There's any number of assessments that are available through the school system. And oftentimes, they go through this and then they work with a child, but the parents don't necessarily get that information. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So you want to make sure that if those assessments are being done, that you're taking advantage of that information that's being provided, that you start having discussions, with your child if you're a parent, or with other youth if you're an educator. And if you're a service provider, you also want to have those kinds of conversations about their direction, what they're doing. And especially when you have those career assessments, to the point that you can have them do self-directed career searches where they're taking responsibility for that own job search, that own career assessment, it makes a huge difference, especially with that self-direction, with that level of independence, and then have a conversation. What are their thoughts around the results of that? And again, one of the things I encourage is you always look for that point of strength within the individual. So when you go through and you have that assessment and you find you're strong in a certain area, then what are the careers that are supported by that strength, wherever it might be? Because when employers hire you and when they use you for your talent, they're looking for where you're strong, not where you're weak. And I usually encourage people to find that area of strength and to really look at developing that and to setting yourself up as the end-all be-all of whatever that might be. Whether it's hands-on culinary type training, or whether it's something mechanical, if it has something to do with language, whatever it might be, everybody has a strength. There's always something that people can work on, and especially in terms of a career. We recently had an individual who was placed through services 15 years ago, is now master chef at a very prestigious restaurant. So, you can get those kind of career developments by really figuring out where you're strong and then by putting your efforts in that direction. Agency-sponsored career counseling. Our program, the Vocational Rehabilitation School-to-Work Transition Program, you can have that and get that career counseling from individuals that are set up to do that, especially students with disabilities. So we want to make sure that they're taking advantage of the resources that are available. And of course, you can go to our website, rehabworks.org. There's a section for School to Work. It includes some frequently asked questions about when you might want to apply for services, what kinds of services are provided, and then really, who it is that should or maybe shouldn't. And the reality is that if you have a condition, anything like that, you shouldn't be trying to figure out for yourself, should I, shouldn't I? Go to those individuals. They'll help, identify. And if they don't or aren't able to help you, they can provide you some direction about other resources that could help you. So there's always something to be gained from tapping into a resource, even if that resource doesn't wind up being the one for you. So when do we get involved? And this is just for your awareness. We typically want to see students with disabilities 2 years before they're getting ready to exit school. They need to be able to really get involved in those vocational activities and in planning to really develop that community support that's going to help them make that transition. If a student's ever at risk of dropping out, we want to be involved in that discussion. Our first emphasis is always on, here's what your options are if you stay in school, and here's what your options are if you're out of school. Typically, being out of school, you're going to have fewer options. So we really do encourage individuals to stay in, but in terms that they can see the benefit of doing that. If there's not going to be a benefit, really, why do it? So we try to talk to them about what those benefits are and what's needed to get to those points. And then, of course, if they're going to drop out, we want to be there also as a support mechanism to help them make that transition into employment, or if there is training available to do that as well. Students beginning community-based work experience, when they start beginning those work experiences, they really need to be getting that guidance and counseling that is going to be helpful for them in the world of work. A lot of individuals, when we talk about where the jobs are in the state of Florida, we ask people how many entry-level jobs out of 10 require a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. And you'd be surprised. So we get all kinds of answers. People often say 4, 5, 7. I've had one person say the majority of jobs, 8 or 9. Reality is it's about 1 to 1.5 jobs in the state of Florida require that bachelor's degree or above for entry level. And that comes as a bit of a wake-up call. So, 8 or 9 of those jobs that are available aren't jobs that require that level of education. So where are the jobs? A lot of them, especially in Florida, you have associate's level programs where you're getting out with 2 years of training, and especially the medical and health field, you're making more than many people who are graduating with a bachelor's. You have your skilled trades, your certificate programs. All of those, typically can be very high paying. There's a shortage of welders out there, for instance. And if somebody does well with their hands and that's a strength for them, they should know that if they go that route, they can make this money and do something that they're good. But those kind of things aren't always communicated very well in the process. And we want individuals to be successful wherever their strength is. If that means a 4-year degree or a 6-year degree, by all means. But even within those degree fields or degree levels, you have specific fields that do better than others. So that kind of information then, what are those fields? And then what are the jobs within those fields that really talk to your strengths? So when you're making these decisions, you're making them from a point of, can I make a living wage? Can I be independent? Even if it's not right away, can I be independent at some point? And if not that level, I always think that people benefit from some type of training or some type of education if they can access that. Even if it's at the level of on-the-job training. Maybe you need to go into a business and get those hands-on skills in order to be able to do a job. But more and more with competition the way it is, people are looking for training. They're looking for people to have experience. So to the extent they can get that, we want to make sure that they do get it. So whenever they're beginning any type of work experience, we want to be sure to be involved. Again, you can visit our site for more information, but make sure that if you do have somebody out there who could benefit from our services, that either make them aware or encourage them to find out more information. So what kind of documents do we use? We look for those individual educational plans or 504 plans to help us in basically identifying where that need is. And most often it's guidance and counseling, medical, psychological records, evaluations that document the person's disability. To be eligible for our services, you have to have some kind of condition that's either going to give you trouble with getting or keeping a job or give you trouble in preparing for that job. So we have to be able to document that, and if those things aren't available, then we'll often do assessments. It may be a psychological assessment. It may be a medical assessment. Sometimes it's a vocational evaluation. We look at the transcript or academic reports. The transcript can give us a ton or wealth of information about services, especially the guidance and counseling piece that individuals will need. We see that a person maybe struggled in their math classes and they have an idea that they want to be a forensic investigator. Well, you're going to be doing some intense math and science. If you really are thinking that you want to go in that direction, you may have some difficulty. And we all know that when something's frustrating, it isn't as enjoyable as what we may perceive it to be. And a lot of times our ideas about what a job is or isn't come from things like the media. So we maybe see CSI or NCIS and we say, oh, that's the job I want to do. Reality is that job may be nothing like that. You may be sitting at a desk or at a stool or at a bench and going through lab work or reports. And if that's your idea, then by all means. But if not, look to things that really tap into those strengths. Attendance and tardiness reports is a huge guidance and counseling piece for us. If the person's having trouble getting to class on time now, they're probably going to have trouble getting to class on time when they graduate high school. If they're having difficulty, meeting those first 2 or 3 classes, then they maybe need to look at a job that doesn't require you to report at 6 or 7 a.m. And if not, what are the things we can do to get that adjusted out? How are they getting up in the morning? How are they getting themselves together? Is mom and dad doing that? And if they are, then what kind of thing can we do to make them become a little more independent? Get them that alarm clock, get them used to getting themselves up and ready and on their way. Behavioral reports, a lot of times those behavioral issues could be a first indicator that there may be something else going on in the mental health arena. So it may be something that isn't addressed by the school system, but we want to make sure is addressed and supported as they're making that transition, so that if they do have depression, anxiety, or some kind of adjustment issue, that it's not impacting their efforts to go into training or education or placement for a career or a job. Vocational training records, career assessments. Like I said, the schools do a lot of those. We talked about some of those resources. And we take a look at that information. We try not to make students jump through the same hoops twice. So if they've already done something and we can use that information, then we try to use that information. We only try to do assessments or evaluations if they're necessary. And of course, involvement with any other agencies. We want to collaborate with the other professionals. So we want to make sure that we're both talking the same language, that we're both on board with the direction things are moving. It doesn't help if you have one professional telling you one thing and another professional telling you something else. So there needs to be that collaboration and helping to support. Sometimes, y'all probably more aware of this than what I was as a counselor, is you get that mom-dad thing. You ever have a child, ask you one thing, get an answer, not like the answer, and then go to the other parent? That happens. And sometimes it happens with agencies. They go to one agency, they maybe don't like what they're hearing, or it's something they're going to have to do. So they avoid that by saying, my other person said this or that. And if you're having that conversation, then you can make sure that everybody is on the same page. The student, the parents know what's going on, the agency professionals, and then you can all work together to support moving that individual forward instead of getting caught up with the he said, she said kind of mentality. Order of selection, financial participation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. We're in an order of selection, but we're serving our priority categories 1 and 2 without a weight. And most students who have disabilities are going to fall under categories 1 or 2. We talk about financial participation. Training and placement are both exempt services for financial participation. And what I think is the most valuable service we provide, guidance and counseling, is also an exempt service. So there's no financial participation for what youth typically need, or most often need, which is that training, the placement, and then the guidance and counseling. We're required to explore comparable benefits. We are a payer of last resort. That said, almost everybody's a payer of last resort these days. And if it's a need for that individual to get to that employment outcome, then typically we're able to provide assistance. What are some of those VR services we talked about? Guidance and counseling. I won't sit there and belabor the point. On-the-job training, community-based work experience, job coaching, and especially over the summer months. Maybe the school's supporting a community-based work experience for the youth, or for the, I almost said child. Don't say child if you're in that situation. They're supporting that, but what happens when you go in there and you have a delay in that, or you have an interruption? Those skills that you developed over that school year, they sometimes go away. I mean, I remember when I was in school taking, say, a math class, and then the next year rolls around after summer and they do the little refresher on the board. I was like, I did not have that a year before. That is nothing that I'm familiar with. So that's one of those things that if you can continue that process on throughout the year, that's going to be much more meaningful. And especially if you have a student or a youth with a severe disability, it impacts them even more to have that interruption. So we as an agency can support that job coaching piece over the summer months when school's not in session. Now, we can't do things certain things while school is in session, because the school would be responsible for it. But when school is out of session, we can provide support that's going to be meaningful for them in terms of employment. Rehabilitation technology. Even though FAST is available, we also provide technology evaluation and support, especially as that student's transitioning out of school. When they're getting ready to exit, and I say getting ready, 5, 6, 7 months before they're getting ready to get out of school, if there's some piece of technology they're going to need for college or career and technical school or employment, those are the kinds of things that we can help them provide while they're still in school in those last few months, to make sure that they have a chance to practice with that technology, so that when they do graduate, that they have it in hand and they know how to use it, and it's really a useful tool for them. That way the school staff are there, they can help support that process, make sure that they really get a handle on it before they take that next step into adulthood. Supported employment. Some of our youth require intense upfront training on the job in order to learn a job. Then they may also need ongoing supports in order to keep the job, especially individuals or students with severe disabilities. So supported employment, we can make that referral in those last 5 or 6 months. So again, whoever in the school system was working with that youth can then provide information to that, and we have providers that help us with placement services, either through supported employment or regular placement, but provide that information that they've acquired over the years, so that when that youth makes that transition, they have a smooth transition and they're not having to start over completely fresh with somebody that's helping them to remain employed. Local education agency services, or the LEAs, the school districts, they're responsible for that specialized classroom instruction for students with disabilities. Now, they're going to be able to provide a lot of assistance, and what they'll do is, when they see that those services and courses are needed, then they're going to develop an individual educational plan. And that IEP team is going to look at things like accommodations, modifications, assistive technology, all of those things, so that they can be successful while they're there in school. That IEP team identifies when to invite agency reps, such as vocational rehabilitation or other agencies as well. Now, if you have a student with a developmental disability, or if you're a parent of a child or youth with a developmental disability, and they are eligible for med waiver, you want to apply for that early on. as early as possible, really. They do have a waiting list, but they are working on some ways to address some of those issues and possibly start bringing some people off of those waiting lists. So if they're not going to need it for 14 years when they make that transition out of high school, then still they need to go ahead and apply so that they, secured their position in that list that the Agency for Persons with Disabilities will be going through. So those are those agency reps. Permission of the parent, guardian, or aged majority student has to be obtained. We just can't show up even though we know that there's students out there who need the parent, the guardian, or if the student is 18 and there's not a guardianship issue, even the student can agree to have us invited. But you have to have that permission before we can come on board. So who receives VR transition services? We don't provide assistance to every student or every youth with a disability. They have to need services. They really are going to have to need them in terms of an employment outcome, because VR, vocational rehabilitation, we're geared specifically towards helping individuals secure meaningful careers. So whatever that might take, education, training, assistive devices, accommodations, any of those things that can really make a difference in that person's life. And if it's not likely that they're going to be able to become employed, without that type of assistance, then by all means, make sure that they're getting referred. If you have a child or a youth that receives benefits due to their disability, they're presumed eligible for our services. We do have a process where we look at that person's condition, their situation, and make a determination about eligibility. But if they are receiving those benefits for their disability, then we have presumptive eligibility for them. We already talked about students falling into priority categories. Most students, and I say, the vast majority, like 99.99%, are going to fall into categories 1 or 2. If you find that you have a student or a child who's being determined too severe to benefit from services, and you have that happening more than once in a blue moon, or you have somebody who's saying your condition really isn't severe enough for services, and you see that happening a lot, those are more statistical anomalies. It really shouldn't be happening like that. So you'll probably want to give me a call or talk to the local leadership, either the unit supervisor or the area supervisor, and find out, say, I have a concern that we have all of these students or all these youth that are falling into these categories. Because it's my understanding that shouldn't happen. So if you do have that, by all means, make sure that you're getting support. Because one of the things I do as a transition administrator is I go in and provide technical assistance. And it just may be a situation where we have new staff who need to be better educated on the process. So if you do find yourself in that situation or hear of them, make sure that they don't just take those things at face value, that they look into those situations. And we already talked about the benefit of training and placement, and that they do not require financial participation. So we're required to coordinate with the LEA. The transition coordinator, school rep, makes referrals to us. We work together to make sure that the schedules meet up so that everybody involved can attend that IEP meeting. If there's a situation where we can't attend for some reason, we usually try to get in there by phone or have an alternate rep come out to the school. If that doesn't happen, you can still come in and meet with us at our offices, and we'll schedule an appointment that way. The LEA provides us with records. We talked about some of those records already. And then the IEP is then coordinated with our IPE, which is that individual plan for employment. And don't ask me why they made this so confusing, where you have an IEP and IPE, all these initials running around that sound similar. But we really want to make sure that they're both looking at the same type of goal, the same type of direction, and that they support each other. And if for some reason it doesn't seem to, then we need to look at where is the disconnect happening. Is it the graduation track? Is it something that we're looking at where we're not really capturing whether the student actually is? We want to make sure that they're saying, and they should, be moving people, and I say people, students, youth, in the same basic direction. And typically that's going to be out into independent living in the world of work. So what services do we provide while they're in high school? Long-term disability planning. A lot of times when you have a student with a condition, they're worried about the here and now, and they're not thinking necessarily in terms of what's going to happen 10 years or 20 years. And it's really important when you're talking about certain types of disabilities, things that may be progressive, even if they're only slowly progressive. Sometimes you'll have conditions that they're slowly progressive for a long time, and then historically there will be a sudden speeding up of the process where they'll, very quickly debilitate. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're working in a job or a career and then suddenly not be able to pursue that career. We want to avoid situations like that. So the long-term planning really makes a difference. Post-secondary accommodations, assistive technology. We talked a little bit about some of those that might be available. There's all kinds of computer programs. There's all kinds of applications. Sometimes people need driver's evaluation or a modified vehicle. We can do like the vehicle modifications. Can't purchase vehicles, but we can look at doing those vehicle modifications when it's needed for employment. And of course, employment. We're all about the career. We're all about the job and making sure it makes sense for the individuals. Community-based work experience. We have several things in place that help assist with things like that. Third-party cooperative arrangements, whereby we help support the school's efforts to provide work experience to students. Those are available in several places throughout the state. Project Search, which is a wonderful model that's come out of Cincinnati, Ohio, through the hospital system, where students get to try out multiple jobs, essentially, and find the right fit from those jobs for them as individuals. So they really get trained in multiple areas and then get to pursue employment in one of those areas. Many of them are hired at that host business or host site. But typically about a third of all of the participants wind up working for that business. And it's usually a large business. Oftentimes, especially if you're in a small community, those hospitals or those hotels, restaurants that have project search sites will hire anywhere from hundreds to thousands of people. High school, high tech. Some students with disabilities, are very academically inclined and really love science, math, technology, and engineering. Any of those core courses, so they get exposure to that through the high school, high tech programs, as well as internships, things like that, where they're actually trying out jobs within the field. On-the-job training. If individuals are going to need it, but maybe they're not going to do well in an educational program, but they do well when they get to practice hands-on. On-the-job training may be the right fit for those individuals. We talked about job coaching over the summer, but we can also assist with things like uniforms and supplies for work experience. Even when the school's providing that, typically they're not going to help with things like uniforms or supplies. That's often passed on to the family. Those are things we can actually assist with as the school is providing that work experience, because the school doesn't provide it. See, we can't do things that the school does do, but we can typically help where they don't. Transportation assistance, for those things that are after school, getting to their career and service centers, being able to learn how to navigate that environment, get around the community, learn who's who, where they are, how to get there. We can typically help with things like that. So what kind of activities support transition? Business connections. I can't emphasize that enough, to make that business connection early on. especially for younger adults or others, you'll have employers who are much more willing to become a mentor to a person early on. And when they do commit to becoming that professional mentor in a field that's, aligned with where that youth is headed, then all of a sudden you have somebody who may be the first person who hires you. But if not, then that employer's connected in the community. They know other people in similar jobs or professions and can probably provide a reference or a word of introduction to get your foot, if you're the youth, into that door where you might not have had it otherwise. And if nothing else, you can definitely get that insight as to what the work is like, what's involved with it, how it's changed or how it's changing, all of those pieces of it that you can't get just through typical academic pursuits or trying to look up the information online. Because when you get it there, it's one way, but you sometimes find the reality is something different. Peer counseling and mentoring. Again, when you have somebody talking to you who maybe they're just out of school a few years, but coming from that younger person, they seem to relate better to that information, pay more attention. So where you can have peer counselors or mentors, it really can make a difference. Sometimes it is strictly counseling and mentoring, but oftentimes, you have friendly relationships that develop as a result of that. And so you wind up then tapping into supports from individuals who do mentoring on a regular basis and are involved in networking, involved in outreach. It's a huge benefit. Campus and industry tours, just getting out into the community again, becoming familiar with what's out there, really having an awareness of where the jobs are, and what kind of jobs are in what type of industries. Community service and volunteerism. I can't say enough about community service. Many people think that if you're going to look at a community service organization or volunteer, you do that if you can't get a job. But really, when you're looking at community service, you should think of it as a parallel track to employment. If you can get into paid employment while you're a youth, that's really what you want to do, and you want to look at community service as well. A lot of the community service will give you access to employers and resources, help you to fill out that resume the same way a work experience would. Community service organizations typically have missions, and their mission will be maybe something along the ways of parks and recreation services. So they're doing the same kinds of things or activities as a park guide or a ranger might do. Or you have, say, Habitat for Humanity, where they're out there, they're building, they're constructing, and they're learning these skills as they work side by side with employers or with other individuals who are also learning that skill, or providers out there who provide the resources for that. So you have, your lumber yards, your construction places, your plumbers, your electricians, all of these professionals out there who are making fantastic livings. That kind of exposure to the community is huge. You may have a student who, if the employer were just to look at them, they're not going to be willing to give them an opportunity. But if they're out there seeing them work and they have that exposure, all of a sudden they're considering a person that they wouldn't have considered before. And if you have that situation where then that person is applying for a job with that employer, who's the employer going to hire first? Somebody they know or somebody they don't know? Typically, half of the jobs we get out there are based on either people who know the employer or being introduced by people who know the employer. It's that word of mouth or that networking that helps them to get the job. So again, I can't say enough about it. You have a student maybe with a disability, who's been used to getting help all their life, and then all of a sudden you put them in a position where they're helping somebody else or they're providing assistance to somebody else. It is a huge, huge benefit that you don't get from other things, like your typical work experiences. So you can get things from community service and volunteerism that you can't get through other resources. If you have, say, a family who's receiving benefits, maybe you're one of those families. When you hear that your child may be looking at employment, the first thing you do is, oh, wait a second now, how's that going to impact the benefits? And we need those benefits in order to make ends meet. And that, that's a reality. People have to find a way to make a living these days, or a way to support themselves and their family. When that happens, you almost get that switch that turns off where, no, we're not going to be looking at employment because that can interfere with this other piece. The reality is that when you have a situation, the employment should be such that you will always make more by working than not working. And there are resources in place to make sure that happens. But if you don't ever get to see what work or work experience can do for you, then you're never going to come to that realization or have that understanding. Community service is a good pathway so that you can see how work or work experiences really can impact an individual and how they can benefit from it. And then also that those services that help guide them to that are there to support the family and the individuals. Youth and social clubs, we talked a bit about that. Again, I can't say enough about the needs. Typically, students, youth, they lose their first job because of lack of what they call soft skills or the social skills. They're inappropriate with their coworkers, their employer, or the customers. They do something they're not supposed to. They took a break too long or too short. They hung around where they shouldn't, something along those lines. So again, it's real critical for us to encourage those types of activities that will help them to be better prepared. We talked about outdoor recreation, faith-based organizations, activities, school-based enterprise. This is a fantastic way to really engage students. If you have a school-based enterprise where they're creating something, whatever it might be, or producing a product, they're learning about the world of business. And the world of business is very different than the educational world. So anytime you can bring business in and make it part of that educational process, where they're involved in ordering, taking care of the money pieces of it, inventory, what happens with a dissatisfied customer service, anything like that is going to help them when they make that transition. And see, whoops, and I went back one. Go to slide. Oops. And I apologize, you all. Agency referrals for community networking. Again, you really want to know your agencies. Vocational rehabilitation is just one of them. You have an agency for persons with disabilities. You have your centers for independent living, your career and service centers, and Social Security benefits planning for beneficiaries. There is some of that available through Social Security. A lot of the funding for benefits planners has been cut, but that's another service that VR is going to be assisting with for those people who are eligible for our services. So again, making sure that you're going to have that money you need. And it doesn't always mean that individuals go completely off benefits. Some individuals are only going to be able to work to a certain portion, and whatever that maximum is that they're able to do that, we're there to help them with that. So some individuals actually still retain their benefits even after going through VR services. But we want to make sure that they have that opportunity to become employed to the extent that they're able. And again, we can help with that and helping to plan for that so that finding employment, obtaining employment is a benefit, not a detriment. And now, questions. Any questions?
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.